The sound of expensive heels clicking against my gravel driveway echoed through the morning air as I peered through the window. There she stood, Corinne Reynolds, HOA president and self-proclaimed rural influencer, surrounded by a team of photographers and assistants dressed in pristine white outfits completely unsuitable for farm life. They were setting up equipment around my historic barn without permission, moving my tools, rearranging hay bales, and discussing where to place their artificial props. I had said no to her demands repeatedly. I had shown her the property boundaries. I had even cited the actual HOA bylaws that she so freely misinterpreted. None of it mattered. Corinne was determined to use my barn as the rustic backdrop for her magazine contest submission, with or without my consent. As I watched her directing her team with dramatic sweeping gestures, pointing imperiously at my property as if she owned it, something inside me finally snapped. I looked over at my rescue pigs, happily rolling in their morning mud bath, and a plan formed in my mind. If Corinne wanted an authentic farm experience for her photo shoot, I would give her exactly that. Every muddy, chaotic, gloriously authentic bit of it. The moment I first laid eyes on the weathered red barn with its century-old timber frame, I knew I had found home. After 15 years of cramped apartment living and saving every spare dollar, this 5-acre slice of rural paradise represented everything I had ever dreamed of. The small farmhouse needed work, but it was solid and filled with character. The previous owners had maintained the historic barn beautifully despite its age, and the rolling pasture stretched out behind it like a green canvas waiting for my vision. I signed the paperwork on a bright spring morning, the realtor handing me the keys with a casual mention of a neighborhood association. It was nothing to worry about, she assured me. Just a loose collection of rural property owners who occasionally met to discuss road maintenance and community events. The dues were minimal, and the rules primarily focused on preventing genuine nuisance issues. It sounded reasonable enough, and my excitement about finally having space for the animal rescue I had planned overshadowed any concerns. The first 3 months were pure bliss. I settled into a rhythm with the land, planted a vegetable garden, and began the process of adopting rescue animals. The pigs came first. 7 gentle souls rescued from a shuttered petting zoo, each with their own distinct personality. Hamlet, the largest, had appointed himself their leader, while Petunia, the smallest, had claimed a special place in my heart with her curious nature and expressive eyes. My nearest neighbors, Thomas and Elaine Henderson, welcomed me warmly. They brought over homemade bread and introduced themselves the day after I moved in. They had lived in the area for decades and shared stories about the history of my property and the surrounding community. When I mentioned my plans for the rescue, they were enthusiastic and offered to help whenever needed. The first hint of trouble arrived in a gleaming white Range Rover that kicked up dust as it crawled slowly past my property one afternoon. I noticed it stopping briefly at my driveway entrance, the driver making notes on a clipboard before continuing down the road. 2 days later, colorful flyers appeared in every mailbox announcing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss, exciting new leadership and vision for our community. Corinne Reynolds had arrived. Fresh from her executive position at a marketing firm in the city, she had purchased the largest property in our rural neighborhood and immediately set her sights on leadership. The meeting was held in her expansive new home, a modern monstrosity that looked jarringly out of place among the traditional farmhouses and cabins that dotted our community. She stood at the front of her gleaming kitchen, perfectly coiffed and dressed in what appeared to be a designer interpretation of country chic that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. The previous HOA president, elderly Mr. Franklin, sat quietly to the side as Karen outlined her vision for our charming but underutilized rural aesthetic. I felt a chill run down my spine as she clicked through a PowerPoint presentation showing before and after images of other rural communities that had been revitalized through strict aesthetic guidelines. Gone were the working farms, replaced by manicured properties that looked like movie sets rather than actual homes where people lived and worked. "We have such potential here," Karen declared, her voice smooth as honey but with an unmistakable edge of steel beneath. "With the right improvements and a consistent community aesthetic, our neighborhood could be featured in magazines. Property values would soar." Her gaze landed directly on me when she mentioned the need to address unsightly animal enclosures and dilapidated outbuildings that were visible from the road. The meaning was clear, though nothing had been directly stated. My barn and rescue animals did not fit her vision of rural perfection. As the meeting concluded and neighbors mingled over expensive wine and catered appetizers, I noticed how carefully Karen had divided the room. Those with newer properties were engaged in enthusiastic conversation about her plans, while those of us with working farms or older homes stood awkwardly on the periphery. The battle lines were being drawn, though I did not yet realize just how personal this fight would become. The first official notice arrived 3 weeks after the meeting. A crisp white envelope with the newly designed HOA logo embossed in gold contained a formal letter citing aesthetic violations on my property. The specific complaints focused on the visibility of my pig enclosure from the road and the deteriorating condition of my historic barn. The letter demanded compliance within 30 days, though it conveniently failed to specify exactly what compliance would entail. I called Thomas immediately. As a long-time resident, I hoped he could provide context for this unprecedented approach. His deep sigh over the phone told me everything before he even spoke. "Karen has been busy," he explained. "Somehow she got herself elected president when Mr. Franklin suddenly resigned. Then she pushed through a whole new set of bylaws in a special session. Only her supporters showed up. The rest of us never received proper notice." The following day, I drove to Mr. Franklin's modest farmhouse at the end of our road. He invited me in for coffee, his hands shaking slightly as he poured. He had served as HOA president for over 15 years, maintaining the community's relaxed approach to governance. "She threatened to sue me personally," he confided, voice barely above a whisper. "Said I had violated state HOA regulations by not maintaining proper records. I cannot afford a legal battle at my age. It seemed easier to step aside." A pattern was emerging. Karen was systematically targeting anyone who did not conform to her vision. Another neighbor, Elaine Henderson, called me in tears after receiving a $500 fine for her excessive and unkempt vegetable garden that had fed her family for generations. The Millers down the road had been cited for their children's treehouse, suddenly deemed an unauthorized structure. The monthly HOA meetings transformed from casual community gatherings into formal affairs held at increasingly inconvenient times. Those who questioned the new regulations found themselves interrupted or ignored. When I attempted to address the legality of the rapidly changing rules, Karen smoothly moved to the next agenda item without acknowledgement. One particularly chilly morning, I glanced out my kitchen window to see Karen herself standing at the edge of my property, expensive camera in hand. She was photographing my barn and pig enclosure, carefully framing shots that emphasized areas that needed repair or painting. When I walked out to confront her, she did not even have the decency to appear embarrassed at being caught trespassing. "Good morning," she called with false cheerfulness. just documenting violations for our records. These photos will be presented at the next meeting." "You are on private property without permission," I responded, struggling to keep my voice level. "That constitutes trespassing." Karen laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "As HOA president, I have the right to inspect properties with ongoing violations. Perhaps if you address the unsightly condition of your animal pens, I would not need to be here." Before I could respond, she gestured broadly at my entire property. "This could all be so charming if properly maintained. Do you realize the potential value of authentic rural properties in today's market? This entire neighborhood could be featured in country living if not for issues like this." Her gaze lingered distastefully on Hamlet and Petunia, who had wandered to the fence to investigate the visitor. "Those animals really should not be visible from any public space. It impacts all our property values." As she turned to leave, she casually mentioned that she had a background in lifestyle marketing before moving to our community. "I am developing quite a following as a rural lifestyle influencer," she added. "The right aesthetic is crucial for my brand development." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This was not just about property values or community standards. Karen was constructing a carefully curated backdrop for her personal brand, and my working rescue farm did not fit her marketable version of country living. The following week, a certified letter arrived demanding immediate aesthetic improvements, with the threat of daily fines for noncompliance. Attached were before and after photoshopped images of what my property could look like, with the proper improvements. My historic barn had been digitally painted a glossy red with decorative white trim that had never been part of its authentic character. The pig enclosure had been completely removed and replaced with an ornamental garden. My authentic working farm had been transformed into a country-themed display piece. As rain pattered against my kitchen window, I spread the papers across my table, anger building with each new demand. What had begun as neighborhood friction was quickly evolving into a direct attack on my way of life and the home I had worked so hard to create. Little did I know that Karen's true intentions would soon become even clearer and far more personally invasive. The text message arrived on a Tuesday evening as I was finishing evening chores. The number was unfamiliar, but the tone of entitlement was immediately recognizable. "This is Karen Reynolds. I need to use your barn this Saturday for a photo shoot. My photographer is booked. We'll send my aesthetic team Thursday to prepare the space." I stared at my phone in disbelief. After weeks of citing my property as an eyesore and violation of community standards, she now wanted to use it for her own purposes. The audacity was breathtaking. I waited until morning to respond, carefully composing a polite but firm refusal citing safety concerns and liability issues. Her response was immediate. "The rustic elements of your barn would provide the perfect backdrop for my country chic brand launch. This could be beneficial for both of us. I could even see my way to reducing those violation fines in exchange for access." When I called to ensure my refusal was absolutely clear, Karen answered with practiced sweetness that barely masked her irritation. "Your charming barn would be perfect for my lifestyle brand photo shoot," she explained as though conferring a great honor. "The weathered wood and authentic farm elements are exactly what my photographer is looking for. We would only need access for a few hours." "I am sorry, but that is not possible," I responded firmly. "The barn houses equipment and supplies for my rescue animals. It is not set up for public access or photography sessions." "We could work around all that," Karen continued, speaking over my objections. "My team could temporarily rearrange things to create the right aesthetic, The animals would need to be kept completely out of sight, of course. The barn is not available for use, I repeated, and the rescue animals live here. This is their home. Her tone shifted instantly from cajoling to cold. Do you have any idea who I am in the lifestyle influencer community? This launch could put our little neighborhood on the map. Country Living magazine is running their annual Rural Renaissance Influencer contest, and with the right setting, I could finally secure national recognition. So that was it. The contest explained her sudden urgency and increasingly aggressive tactics. When I once again declined her request, the pretense of politeness evaporated completely. The HOA bylaws give the board inspection rights to any property with violations, she snapped. As president, I can exercise that right at any time. We will be there Saturday at 9. Make sure those filthy animals are nowhere near my photo shoot. The call ended abruptly, leaving me holding my phone in stunned silence. The threat was clear. She intended to use HOA authority to force access to my property for her personal gain. This was no longer about community standards or property values. It was about one woman's determination to use my home as a backdrop for her social media fame, with or without permission. That evening, I pulled out the binder of HOA documents I had collected since troubles began. Dusty pages of bylaws covered my dining table as I searched for the truth behind Corinne's claims. Page after page confirmed my suspicions. There was nothing granting her the sweeping power she had claimed. The inspection rights did exist, but with very specific limitations. Section 12.4 stated clearly, board members may inspect properties with documented violations solely to verify compliance with specific bylaws. Inspections must be conducted with 48 hours written notice, and owners must accept the property in its normal working condition during such inspections. Normal working condition. The phrase jumped out at me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small surge of hope. If Corinne insisted on using her inspection rights as a pretense for her photo shoot, then she would have to accept my property in its authentic working state. I called my friend Lisa, a real estate attorney who had helped with my property purchase. She arrived the next morning, reading glasses perched on her nose as she examined the bylaws. They do have inspection rights, she confirmed, then looked up with a gleam in her eye, but only to verify compliance with actual bylaws, not for personal use. And they must accept the property in its normal working condition during inspection. Lisa tapped the page thoughtfully. If she shows up claiming inspection rights, you cannot legally block her access, but you have no obligation to alter the normal working condition of your farm for her convenience. Through my kitchen window, I could see my rescue pigs happily wallowing in their mud bath, a daily ritual they enjoyed with enthusiasm. Hamlet particularly loved creating spectacular mud splashes that sometimes reached impressive distances. What about liability if she brings a photography team under the guise of inspection? I asked. Lisa smiled. Have them sign this. She pulled out a document from her briefcase. It is a standard inspection acknowledgement form. It confirms they are entering a working farm environment at their own risk and acknowledges that no special accommodations will be made to alter normal farm operations. As Lisa drove away, I stood on my porch watching the pigs enjoy their afternoon activities. If Corinne Reynolds wanted authentic barn access for her inspection, she would get exactly that, the full, authentic experience. The plan forming in my mind was simple, completely legal, and perfectly aligned with the HOA's own bylaws. Sometimes malicious compliance is the sweetest form of resistance. The following morning, I awoke with renewed purpose. If Karen intended to abuse her position to access my property, I would ensure she received the authentic farm experience she claimed to celebrate in her influencer brand. I began by calling Thomas and Elaine, whose properties had also fallen victim to Karen's targeting. She is using the inspection clause to bring a photography team here on Saturday, I explained. Supposedly to document violations, but really for her magazine contest photo shoot. That is outrageous, Elaine exclaimed. What are you going to do? I am going to give her exactly what she asked for, access to an authentic working farm in its normal condition. And I could use your help. Their eager agreement warmed my heart. This was not just my fight anymore. It had become a community standing against one person's tyrannical overreach. Next, I called several other neighbors who had faced similar harassment. By noon, a small resistance team had formed, each person offering resources and assistance. Mr. Franklin provided his old video recording equipment to document everything legally. The Millers offered additional mud and organic materials for the pigs' wallow. Everyone understood the importance of staying precisely within the boundaries of the law while delivering a message that could not be misinterpreted. That afternoon, I moved the pigs' favorite mud wallow to a new location, still within their proper enclosure but strategically positioned near the barn's main entrance. I enriched their diet with extra portions of their favorite fermented foods, knowing from experience this would enhance their natural aromatic presence substantially by Saturday morning. My phone buzzed with a text from Corinne confirming her team would arrive at 9 on Saturday. We will need the barn cleared of farm equipment and animals secured out of sight, she wrote. My team will arrive with props and lighting equipment. I responded with a single line quoting directly from the HOA bylaws about inspections occurring with the property in its normal working condition. I attached a photo of the inspection documentation Lisa had prepared, noting that all visitors would need to sign the liability waiver before entering a working farm environment. Her response was immediate and furious. This is an official HOA inspection. You cannot restrict our access or activities. I am not restricting access, I replied calmly. I am simply maintaining normal farm operations as permitted during inspections. The documentation protects both parties. The lack of response told me everything I needed to know. Corinne had not expected resistance backed by actual legal standing. She had become accustomed to bullying her way forward without consequence. Friday evening, my neighbors arrived to help with final preparations. We positioned small, legal recording devices throughout the property, ensuring they were visible and included clear signage about electronic monitoring as required by state law. Thomas helped reinforce the pig enclosure gate with a simple latch that could be opened easily, perhaps too easily with the right nudge from a curious pig snout. The Miller's teenage son helped install a subtle sprinkler system near the barn entrance, ostensibly for dust control, should farm vehicles need to operate during the inspection. Mr. Franklin tested the recording equipment one final time, ensuring everything was operational and properly disclosed. You know she will try to retaliate, Elaine warned as we finished our preparations. I am prepared for that, I assured her. Everything we are doing is completely within our rights as property owners. The HOA bylaws she has wielded like a weapon actually protect us when properly understood. As my neighbors departed, each offered words of encouragement and solidarity. This had become more than a personal battle against one unreasonable woman. It represented our community's stand against the transformation of our authentic rural neighborhood into a sanitized backdrop for social media content. I spent the evening reviewing the plan and preparing the inspection documentation. Each form clearly stated that visitors were entering a working farm with active animal husbandry operations. The acknowledgement specified that no special accommodations would be made to alter normal farm functions during the inspection. A separate photography and recording release ensured that any images captured on my property remained under my control, a small detail that might prove particularly valuable later. As I fed the pigs their special evening meal, enriched with extra helpings of their favorite fermented vegetables, I explained our plan to them. Hamlet seemed particularly attentive, his intelligent eyes following my words as though he understood the important role he would play in tomorrow's events. "Just be yourselves," I told them, scratching behind Hamlet's ears. "Your authentic farm behavior is exactly what we need." Dawn broke on Saturday with perfect weather for our plan. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the property as I completed morning chores and positioned the fresh mud wallow precisely where it would be most effective. My heart raced with nervous anticipation, but beneath the anxiety lay a bedrock of certainty. I was standing my ground legally and ethically against someone who had consistently violated both principles. Whatever happened in the next few hours, Corinne Reynolds was about to learn that authentic farm life could not be controlled, directed, or curated for her convenience. Some lessons can only be taught through direct experience. At precisely 8:55, the distant sound of vehicles approaching broke the morning quiet. I straightened my work overalls and checked one last time that everything was in place. The barn stood ready in its most authentic state, hay scattered in natural patterns, tools positioned as they would be during a typical work day, and the unmistakable earthy aroma of a working farm hanging in the morning air. The pigs watched curiously from their enclosure, bellies full from their special breakfast. Hamlet stood closest to the gate, his massive frame quivering with interest at the unusual morning activity. I had deliberately chosen not to clean the barn as I normally would on Saturday mornings. If this was to be an inspection of normal working conditions, then normal working conditions they would receive. A convoy of 3 vehicles crawled up my gravel driveway, Corinne's white Range Rover leading 2 other cars filled with photography equipment. I stood on my porch, clipboard with inspection forms in hand, expression carefully neutral as Corinne emerged from her vehicle. She wore pristine white linen pants, an expensive-looking blouse, and impractical heeled boots that immediately began sinking into the soft ground. Massive designer sunglasses covered half her face, but could not disguise her expression of distaste as the farm smells reached her. Behind her, 5 people exited the other vehicles. They unloaded equipment that seemed excessive for a simple property inspection: light stands, reflectors, multiple cameras, even clothing racks with additional outfits. One assistant carried a clipboard with what appeared to be shot lists and positioning diagrams. "Good morning," I called pleasantly, walking forward with my clipboard. "I have the inspection documentation ready for everyone to sign before you begin." Corinne's smile was tight as she approached. "This is ridiculous. We are conducting an official HOA inspection. Your paperwork is unnecessary." "Actually, it is required for liability purposes," I replied, offering her the clipboard. "Everyone entering a working farm environment needs to acknowledge the inherent risks. Standard practice, especially when bringing photography equipment onto private property." Her photographer, a bearded man with an expensive camera already in hand, hesitated. "Corinne, you said this was a secured location with proper permissions. Is there an issue?" I smiled at him directly. "There is no issue as long as everyone understands this is a working farm being inspected in its normal operating condition, as specified in the HOA Bylaws Section 12.4. I deliberately emphasized the legal reference. Karen snatched the clipboard from my hand. "Fine. We will sign your forms and get started. We have a tight schedule to maintain." As she signed with an aggressive flourish, I noticed the others exchanging uncomfortable glances. Clearly, they had been told a different story about the nature of this visit. One by one, they signed the forms, which I carefully collected and placed in a protective folder that Mr. Franklin would keep secure in his vehicle parked down the road. "The barn is this way," I gestured, leading the group along the path that conveniently passed directly beside the pig enclosure. The pigs, detecting visitors, moved enthusiastically to the fence line. Karen gave them a wide berth, her nose wrinkling visibly. "Could you not have secured those animals elsewhere for this inspection?" she hissed. "As per Section 12.4, the property must be maintained in its normal working condition during inspections," I recited pleasantly. "The pigs are always in their enclosure during morning hours. That is their normal condition." The photographer had already begun snapping test shots of the barn exterior, his assistant setting up a light reflector to capture the morning sunlight on the weathered wood. "We will need to move some of this equipment," Karen announced as we entered the barn. She gestured dismissively to my carefully organized farm tools. "It clutters the visual space, and that hay needs to be redistributed for better framing." I smiled politely. "I am afraid that would violate the inspection parameters. The barn must remain in its normal working condition. Any alteration would invalidate the inspection purpose." "This is absurd," she snapped, her composed facade cracking. "We need proper setup for the photos." "Photos documenting violations must capture the actual conditions," I reminded her. "Unless this is not actually an inspection." I raised an eyebrow questioningly. The photographer paused his equipment setup. "Karen, you told us this was a contracted photo shoot location. Is this an actual HOA inspection?" Karen's face flushed. "It is both. We are documenting violations while capturing content for the community newsletter." "And for your Country Living magazine contest submission?" I asked innocently. "The one due next week." The silence that followed confirmed everything. Her team exchanged glances, clearly realizing they had been misled about the nature of this visit. "Let us just get started," Karen finally said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Set up the primary shot facing the north wall. We will work around the conditions." As her team began positioning equipment, disrupting the natural dust that had settled on the barn floor, I glanced out the wide doorway toward the pig enclosure. Hamlet had positioned himself near the gate, watching the proceedings with unusual interest. His large snout pressed curiously against the simple latch mechanism. "I should warn you," I called out to the team as they worked. "The dust can get quite active when disturbed. The sprinkler system might activate automatically if the sensors detect excessive particulates. It is part of the farm's fire prevention system." This was not strictly true, but the confused looks on their faces were worth the small deception. They began moving more carefully, trying to avoid triggering the automatic system that Thomas had helped install the previous evening. Karen directed her team with growing frustration as each attempt to create a perfectly staged shot was hampered by the authentic farm conditions. The natural light refused to cooperate without proper reflectors. The genuine farm equipment could not be moved without violating the inspection parameters. The increasingly powerful farm aromas made concentration difficult for team members more accustomed to studio environments. "This is impossible," one assistant muttered, trying to position a light stand on the uneven barn floor. I observed quietly from the doorway, waiting for the perfect moment. The team had fully committed to their setup, equipment positioned strategically throughout the barn. Karen stood in the center, practicing poses for what was clearly intended to be her magazine contest submission photo. The timing could not have been more perfect for what was about to unfold. Perfect lighting now. Let us get some test shots, Karen directed, positioning herself against a backdrop of weathered barn wood. Her photographer adjusted his camera settings while assistants held reflectors to capture the ideal rustic glow on her expensively made-up face. The moment felt ripe for the next phase of my plan. I casually strolled toward the barn entrance, smartphone recording in hand. Just documenting the official inspection for my records, I explained when Karen shot me a suspicious glance. As I reached the doorway, I paused to adjust my boot, deliberately nudging the barn door wider, providing a clear line of sight between the photography session and the pig enclosure beyond. Hamlet, ever observant, immediately noticed the increased activity and pressed his substantial weight against the gate. "Let us try a few poses with the prop basket," Karen instructed. An assistant hurried forward with an artfully arranged basket of fresh produce, clearly store-bought despite the fresh from the garden aesthetic they were attempting to create. The sound of a gate latch giving way was subtle, but the enthusiastic trotting of hooves that followed was unmistakable. All 7 pigs, led by Hamlet, had discovered their freedom and were now investigating the intriguing new mud wallow positioned perfectly between their enclosure and the open barn door. "What is that noise?" Karen turned toward the doorway just as Hamlet discovered the joys of the fresh mud. His substantial body created an impressive splash as he dropped heavily into the wallow, sending a spray of mud in a spectacular arc. "Oh my God, the animals are loose!" shrieked one assistant, pointing toward the approaching procession of curious pigs. I stepped forward, my expression a careful mask of concern. Oh dear, the inspection must have disturbed their routine. They seemed to be investigating the unusual activity. "Control your animals immediately," Karen demanded, backing away from the doorway as Hamlet emerged from his mud bath, dripping with fresh earth and clearly interested in the strangers in his barn. "I cannot interfere with their normal behavior during an official inspection," I responded calmly. "That would violate Section 12.4 of the bylaws you are here to enforce. The property must remain in its normal working condition." Chaos erupted as Hamlet, now gloriously mud-covered, ambled happily into the barn, his curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar equipment. The photography assistant screamed as Hamlet bumped gently against her legs, leaving a distinctive smear on her white pants before investigating a light stand with his mud-covered snout. "This is outrageous," Karen shouted, scrambling to higher ground atop a hay bale as Petunia and 2 other pigs followed their leader into the barn. "Get these filthy animals away from my equipment." "They are simply following their normal routine," I explained, making no move to intervene as Petunia discovered the prop basket, tipping it over to investigate the store-bought vegetables within. "Pigs are naturally curious animals. This is authentic farm behavior." The photographer hurriedly raised his expensive camera as one pig investigated the trailing cables of his equipment. Another assistant abandoned a reflector, which toppled over with a crash that startled the pigs into more energetic exploration of the space. "My shoes, these are Italian leather," Karen wailed as she tried to maintain her balance on the hay bale while Hamlet circled below, apparently fascinated by her precarious perch. The sprinkler system chose that perfect moment to activate, triggered not by dust sensors, but by Thomas's teenage son, who was watching from a carefully concealed position near the control valve. Water sprayed in a gentle mist throughout the barn entrance, creating perfect conditions for the mud-covered pigs to distribute their earthy coating more effectively. My cameras, the lighting equipment. The photographer was frantically trying to cover his gear as the combination of water, excited pigs, and disturbed dust created an environment entirely unsuited for professional photography. Through it all, I stood calmly recording with my smartphone, occasionally narrating for the benefit of the video. As we can see, the official HOA inspection is proceeding with the property in its normal working condition, as required by Section 12.4 of the bylaws. Corinne's famous composure shattered completely as she watched her carefully orchestrated photoshoot dissolve into magnificent farmyard chaos. This is deliberate sabotage. You planned this. I plan to maintain my farm in its normal working condition during your inspection, as legally required, I corrected. Everything happening is normal behavior for a working farm with rescue animals, as documented in the forms everyone signed before entering the property. One assistant had retreated to the Range Rover, abandoning expensive equipment in favor of personal safety. The photographer was attempting to salvage his cameras, while avoiding Hamlet's friendly attempts to investigate the interesting straps and buttons on his gear. The inspection is over, Corinne finally declared, her voice rising to a shriek as she tried unsuccessfully to shoo away Petunia, who had discovered that designer boots made excellent scratching posts. Everyone pack up immediately. But you have not completed the official inspection documentation, I protested innocently, holding up a clipboard with inspection forms. Without proper documentation, how will the HOA know what violations were identified? Corinne's glare could have melted steel as she finally abandoned her hay bale perch, sacrificing her dignity in a desperate dash for the door. Hamlet, interpreting this as an invitation to play, followed with enthusiastic grunts, his substantial mud-covered frame blocking her direct path to escape. "This is the last time you will see me on this property," she hissed as she finally reached the doorway, her pristine outfit now decorated with authentic farm patterns in varying shades of brown. "But trust me, this is not over. The HOA board will hear about this outrage." "I certainly hope so," I agreed pleasantly. "I have complete video documentation of the entire official inspection to share at the next meeting. I am sure everyone will be fascinated by the proceedings." The photography team retreated in disarray, leaving behind several pieces of equipment in their haste to escape the enthusiastic attention of my rescue pigs. Corinne's final backward glance promised retribution, but the mud splatter decorating her designer sunglasses somewhat diminished the intimidation factor. As the vehicles spun out of my driveway, spraying gravel in their haste to depart, my neighbors emerged from their observation points around the property. Thomas was the first to reach me, his weathered face split by a broad grin. "That," he declared, "was the most satisfying thing I have seen in 20 years of living here." Elaine was laughing so hard she could barely speak. The look on her face when Hamlet approached her hay bale fortress, priceless. Mr. Franklin's calm voice added, "And all completely legal and properly documented. Well done." As my neighbors helped round up the pigs, who seemed thoroughly pleased with their morning adventure, I felt a sense of community solidarity that had been missing since Corinne's arrival. Whatever retaliation might follow, we had stood together against the misuse of power. Sometimes justice wears unexpected clothes, or in this case, a generous coating of authentic farm mud. The aftermath arrived swiftly. Before sunset, a barrage of texts and emails flooded my phone, each more threatening than the last. Corinne's messages promised lawsuits, property liens, even criminal charges for animal endangerment and intentional property damage. Each threat dissolved the moment I replied with a simple reminder of the signed inspection documentation and complete video record. 3 days later, printed notices appeared in every mailbox announcing an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. The formally worded document cited dangerous property conditions and intentional sabotage of HOA functions as the primary agenda items. The subtext was clear. This would be Corinne's attempt to regain control of the narrative and punish my resistance. "She is calling in all her supporters," Thomas warned when he called to discuss the meeting. "Been making personal visits to everyone who might vote her way." "Then we need to make sure everyone else attends too," I replied. "This affects all of us." The community center was packed when I arrived that evening. Corinne had positioned herself at the front, surrounded by her usual supporters. She had traded her designer farm chic for a severe business suit that signaled she meant serious business.